Hi, I've made a new channel called Lunala Tales. On this channel, I'll upload the stories you ask for. Just comment below what kind of story you want, and I'll make it here on Lunala Tales. The link is in the description. Subscribe now, and tell me what story you want next. Rain pounded through the thick alien canopy, drenching leaves the size of starship hull plates and turning the jungle floor into a swamp of mud and rotting vines. Lightning cracked above the distant mountains, momentarily lighting up the horizon, and in that flash of white-hot brilliance, 3 alien scouts laughed like conquering heroes. Their armor gleamed with fresh insignias, their rifles hummed with power cells on full charge, and each of them wore the same smug grin beneath his helmet visor. They were the finest trackers in the interstellar Recon Corps. The best of the best. Thermal vision so precise, one of them bragged, that they could spot a mosquito's heartbeat through a steel wall. They joked about how pathetic human soldiers were, still clinging to camouflage nets and hiding in bushes like frightened animals. The others roared with laughter, one of them pounding his chest plate for emphasis, as if daring the entire galaxy to find anyone who could outwit them. The wind carried their voices far across the jungle. Far enough that the man buried in the mud below the ridge could hear every word. And Sergeant Caleb Rourke smiled, teeth glinting faintly in the rain, as he tightened his finger on the trigger. He had been lying there for 6 hours, motionless, covered in layers of wet earth, leaves plastered to his back, insects crawling over his neck like he was just another log in the swamp. The aliens were right about one thing. Their thermal vision was almost perfect. Almost. What they did not know, and what Caleb was counting on, was that mud soaked through to the bone had its own way of laughing at heat sensors. It blended body warmth into the swamp itself, erased human heat signatures like chalk on wet pavement. It turned soldiers into ghosts. And right now, he was the ghost these overconfident scouts would never see coming. He could hear them through the tiny comm receiver in his ear, their voices bouncing between frequencies his team had hacked days ago. Arrogant voices talking about how primitive humans were, how this war was going to be over in a matter of weeks. One even suggested they should capture a human alive for sport. Caleb's finger rested calmly against the trigger guard, steady as a heartbeat in deep sleep. His rifle scope never wavered from the lead alien's visor. The man was laughing so hard his helmet lights flickered with each breath. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the smell of ozone and wet metal through the trees. The alien squad slowed its pace, scanning the terrain, but casually, like tourists more than soldiers. Caleb didn't move. Not yet. Patience was his weapon as much as the rifle. He counted each step they took, the distance closing as they walked straight into the zone he had prepared hours ago. The mud pit near the fallen tree, the vines that could be pulled to block exits, the perfect angles for shots if things went bad. Every inch of this clearing belonged to him. They just didn't know it yet. One of the scouts, tall, thin, antenna-like spines rising from his armor, boasted about the last battle on Vega Prime, where their thermal tech had flushed out 20 human soldiers hiding in sewer tunnels. Not one survived, he claimed proudly. The others laughed again, voices crackling with static through the rain. Caleb's jaw tightened. He remembered Vega Prime. He remembered the evacuation orders coming too late, the screams in the comm channels before silence swallowed them. He waited until the talkative one leaned against a tree, visor lights flickering as he joked about promotions and medals. Then Caleb exhaled slowly, the sound lost in the storm, and squeezed the trigger once. The shot was no louder than a twig snapping. The alien's helmet shattered before the others even realized what had happened. He collapsed face first into the mud, rifle slipping from his claws. The other two froze, heads jerking around wildly, scanners humming as they searched for heat signatures, motion trails, anything. But all they saw was rain and jungle and the slowly cooling body of their leader leaking steam into the storm. The second alien shouted something in panic, his words cutting through the comm channel Caleb was still listening to. They thought maybe it was a sniper drone or some atmospheric glitch. Their tech could not be wrong. It had to be the weather. It had to be anything except a single human with a rifle and mud for armor. Caleb stayed silent. He shifted position slowly, crawling through muck so thick it swallowed the sound of his movements. The remaining scouts circled back to back now, rifles raised, scanning every treetop and shadow. One of them cursed about the rain messing with the senses. The other snapped at him to shut up and focus. Their armor lights cut streaks through the mist like miniature search beams, but they were aiming too high. Caleb was already behind them, mud dripping from his helmet, rifle steady. Another breath. Another trigger pull. The second alien dropped before he even hit the alarm on his wrist panel. The last one panicked. He fired wildly into the trees, energy bolts cutting through branches, showering sparks and splinters. He shouted for backup, for drones, for anything. Static answered him. Caleb had jammed their comms 2 hours ago. The alien's visor flicked through scanning modes so fast it began to glitch, switching colors and filters uselessly as if changing the lens enough times would somehow make the ghost appear. Caleb waited until the soldier ran out of ammunition and stood trembling in the storm, clutching his useless rifle like a child holding a broken toy. The human rose slowly from the mud 20 meters away, a dark shape peeling itself out of the swamp. For one heartbeat the alien froze, staring through the visor at this figure rising where no heat signature existed. Caleb said nothing. He didn't need to. One last shot ended it. The clearing fell silent except for the rain. Caleb crouched again, checked the perimeter, then dragged himself back under cover. More would be coming soon. The outpost was only 2 clicks north, and these scouts were just the eyes of something bigger. He wiped the mud from his visor, listening to distant thunder rolling like artillery across the mountains. The arrogance of these scouts had been the first crack in the enemy's armor. He was going to pry that crack wide open before the night was over. But for now, he lay back in the mud, motionless again, as if he had never been there at all. Alien Command did not like surprises. Especially not the kind involving 3 dead scouts with the best thermal optics in the quadrant lying facedown in the mud. Reinforcements were scrambled immediately, fast-moving gunships slicing through the storm toward the jungle clearing where the squad had gone silent. The radio chatter crackled across half a dozen frequencies, overlapping voices demanding explanations, scanning reports, casualty confirmations. Somewhere in the confusion, the word human came up, half question, half accusation, like even saying it out loud was an insult to their technology. A single soldier from a species they considered primitive had just wiped out their finest trackers, and no one could explain how. Caleb Rourke listened to all of it from a hollowed-out tree trunk, rain dripping steadily through the leaves overhead. He had moved positions again after the last shot, a habit drilled into him by every veteran who had lived long enough to teach someone else. Never stay where the enemy expects you. The gunship's engines rumbled in the distance like angry hornets, their floodlights stabbing through the mist in wild, sweeping arcs. He could imagine the pilots frowning inside their cockpits, frustrated that they were flying blind in a jungle thick enough to eat entire vehicles. He shifted his rifle slightly, tracking the noise without aiming yet. Taking out aircraft would draw too much heat too soon. Better to wait. Better to bleed them slowly. The first reinforcements hit the ground half a click away, armored boots splashing through the muck as squads fanned out in textbook formations. Their voices carried through the storm, confident at first, like they believed sheer numbers would fix whatever had killed the scouts. Caleb smirked under his helmet. Numbers only made bigger targets. He watched through the scope as the aliens spread into the trees, thermal visors flicking side to side, rifles ready. They were cautious now, no longer laughing. The jungle swallowed them quickly, vines and mist wrapping around their armor until they looked less like soldiers and more like ghosts themselves. But ghosts made mistakes too. One of them paused near a cluster of steaming plants, visor scanning the foliage, when Caleb sent a single round snapping through the rain. It punched straight through the alien's visor and out the back of his helmet, dropping him before anyone else even saw the muzzle flash. Shouts erupted immediately, the entire squad spinning toward the shot, but by the time they fired, Caleb was gone again, rolling down into a gully thick with water and mud. Energy bolts scorched the ridge where he had been seconds earlier, turning saplings into burning splinters. The gunships wheeled overhead, their lights combing the treetops as if he had sprouted wings and flown away. The squad leader barked orders, his voice tight with frustration, and they advanced cautiously into the gully, rifles sweeping side to side. Caleb crawled through a slit trench he had dug hours before, silent as the rain itself, until he was behind them again. They moved like professionals, overlapping fields of fire, every helmet scanning a different direction. Professionals usually died slower. Caleb lined up the next shot carefully and put a round through the alien carrying the long-range compact. The soldier fell forward into the mud, antenna snapping, sparks spitting from the ruined equipment. Now their calls for backup were fading into static. Panic started leaking through their discipline. 2 of them fired into the shadows at nothing, nerves shot, while the squad leader cursed them back into line. They knew he was out there somewhere, but the thermal optics showed only cold jungle and falling rain. One alien muttered something about ghosts and demons, voice shaking over the comm-net. Another snapped at him to shut up before the officer heard. Caleb almost laughed. Fear spread faster than bullets when you fed it right. The officer finally ordered them into a tight perimeter, rifles pointing outward as they dragged the bodies into the center. That was smart. Made his job harder. He studied the formation through the scope, counting intervals, angles, lines of fire. They were nervous but not stupid. They kept their visors moving constantly, overlapping sectors so no 2 looked the same way for long. The gunships above circled lower now, lights slashing through the trees, engines echoing off the hills. Caleb stayed low, waiting for the right moment. It came when one alien cracked. The youngest by his voice, muttering over comms about wanting to fall back to the outpost, about not signing up for whatever this was. The officer snapped at him to hold position. The rookie started pacing instead, nerves unraveling, stepping out of formation toward the ridge. Caleb put a round through him before the officer finished shouting his name. The soldier collapsed halfway up the slope, and the perimeter broke as 2 others scrambled after him against orders. Caleb slid sideways through the mud, using their confusion to relocate again before return fire lit up the trees. Energy bolts hissed overhead, cracking branches, showering leaves like green snow. He dropped into a sinkhole thick with ferns, crawled through it on elbows and knees, then popped up 2 ridges over with a fresh angle on the squad. They were dragging the wounded rookie back into formation when his next shot took the officer himself through the visor. The rest panicked. No one held formation now. Some fired wildly into the jungle while others bolted downslope toward the landing zone. The gunships dropped flares, lighting the hills in harsh white fire as if daylight would help. It didn't. Caleb moved again, always moving, staying low, never where they expected. By the time the last few survivors stumbled back toward the landing zone, half their squad was down and the rest were yelling into broken comms about demons in the trees. The gunships finally unleashed rockets into the hills, explosions rolling through the jungle, shattering trees, tearing craters through the mud. Caleb was already gone, slipping through a ravine toward another position he had prepared earlier. The bombardment churned the ridge into smoking wreckage, but he was nowhere near it when the flames died down. The aliens would find nothing but shell holes and bodies cooling in the rain. Far off, more engines echoed through the storm. Bigger ships this time. Command would be furious. They would send more troops, more firepower, maybe even armor units if they could clear a landing zone wide enough. Caleb checked the charge on his rifle, mud dripping from the barrel, and crawled deeper into the jungle. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Valkle arrived with the 3rd wave, a towering figure in blackened armor that seemed to swallow the rain instead of reflecting it. The rank insignias along his shoulders marked him as a field commander, the kind whose name carried weight back at Central Command. He walked through the wreckage of the previous squads without a word, visor scanning the burning craters, the bodies half buried in mud, the snapped antennae from ruined compacts. The surviving scouts snapped to attention, but Valkle barely looked at them. His silence carried more threat than any shouting could have. This was no longer a simple sweep operation. Someone was making fools out of his troops, and he intended to end it personally. Caleb watched through a gap in the roots of a massive fallen tree as the commander inspected the scene. Even from here, Caleb could feel the shift in atmosphere. The first squads had been careless, laughing, underestimating the jungle and the soldier hiding in it. Valkle moved differently. No wasted motion, no unnecessary noise, helmet turning slowly as if recording every inch of terrain for later study. Caleb shifted his rifle slightly, tracking the commander through the scope, but something told him not to take the shot. Not yet. Killing officers was like knocking over hornet nests. You waited until you were ready for the swarm before you poked it. The reinforcements spread out on Valkle's orders, but this time they deployed sensors Caleb hadn't seen before. Small drones no bigger than birds shot into the trees, scattering in every direction, their wings humming softly through the rain. Caleb watched them glow faintly in infrared as they zipped over ridges and into ravines. If they were thermal-based, the mud might still protect him, but he doubted the aliens would make the same mistake twice. He crawled backward under the tree, keeping low, boots sinking into muck. The drones vanished into the canopy, too fast to track, and Caleb realized the game had just changed. The first sign of trouble came when one drone dove toward a patch of ferns 200 meters north and let out a shrill alarm before a squad riddled the entire area with energy fire. Birds exploded out of the trees in panicked flocks. Caleb grinned despite himself. They were jumpy now, firing at every shadow, wasting ammunition on bushes and wildlife. He began working his way south, slow and steady, planning to draw them even farther off course before slipping back toward the ridge where their transports waited. Valkle seemed to sense the tactic. He ordered half his forces to hold the landing zone while the rest swept outward in a tightening spiral. It was a good strategy. Methodical. The kind that trapped animals in shrinking circles until there was nowhere left to run. Caleb kept moving, every muscle aching from hours of crawling through mud, but he stayed ahead of the spiral for now. The aliens began using sound projectors next, devices that blasted artificial gunfire and human-sounding screams into the jungle, hoping to flush him out or make him reveal his position by reflex. Caleb ignored them, slipping through gullies and under fallen logs while the fake noises echoed around him. He had been through worse in training exercises back on Earth. Real men screaming had haunted those nights. These recordings were nothing. Then came the psychological games. The aliens hacked into open comm frequencies, broadcasting messages in broken English, promising safety if he surrendered, threatening torture if he didn't. One voice claimed they had captured Earth soldiers from another sector and were executing them one by one until Caleb gave himself up. He knew it was a lie. There were no other human units within 3 systems of this outpost, but the cold precision of the voice made even him shiver slightly. They wanted him rattled. A nervous soldier made mistakes. He gave them a mistake. Or at least the appearance of one. Near a small waterfall he left a trail of footprints leading into a thicket, along with a spent ammo cartridge half buried in the mud. Then he circled wide and climbed into the branches of a banyan tree overlooking the thicket from the opposite side. The aliens followed the footprints like hounds, fanning out as they advanced. When one paused to examine the cartridge, Caleb dropped him with a single shot that sent the rest diving for cover. Panic rippled again despite Valkle's harsh commands to hold formation. One alien fired blindly into the trees, another slipped in the mud and fell face-first with a grunt. Caleb used the chaos to vanish deeper into the jungle before the drones could converge on his position. Rain poured harder now, turning ravines into rushing streams and hillsides into slides of wet clay. The alien soldiers cursed over comms as they slipped and slogged through the mess, their heavy armor sinking to the knees in some spots. Caleb moved lighter, keeping to higher ground when he could, using vines and roots to stay above the worst of it. He watched one soldier lose his footing completely and tumble down a slope, armor sparking as it slammed into rocks at the bottom. The others dragged him out swearing, scanning the ridges for sniper fire that never came. Caleb let them sweat. He conserved ammunition, firing only when it counted, always at the edges of their formation to keep them guessing. A shot from the left, then silence. 20 minutes later a shot from the right. He made them feel surrounded even though he was only one man. The psychological pressure built with every step they took deeper into the jungle. As darkness began creeping through the storm clouds, Caleb overheard Valkle ordering his troops to deploy floodlights on portable tripods. White beams slashed through the rain, cutting harsh cones of light across the trees. Shadows leapt in every direction. The soldiers flinched at every flicker, every branch swaying in the wind. Caleb moved just outside the glow, circling them like a wolf beyond a campfire. Then the first drone finally found him. It zipped through the canopy and let out that same shrill alarm, red lights flashing as it dove straight toward his position. Caleb rolled aside just before the squad opened fire, energy bolts tearing the undergrowth to shreds. He sprinted downhill through sheets of rain while alarms and shouted orders erupted behind him. Branches whipped his helmet as he slid into a ravine, bullets of mud spraying around him. The aliens gave chase this time instead of circling cautiously. Heavy boots pounded the slope behind him, voices barking through the storm. Caleb wove through tree trunks, staying low, letting them gain just enough ground to feel like they might catch him. He led them toward a marsh he had scouted earlier, a stretch of ground that looked solid but wasn't. The first soldier hit the marsh and sank to his thighs instantly. The next went waist-deep before the others realized what was happening. Caleb turned and fired twice into the lights of their rifles while they struggled in the sucking mud. 2 helmets shattered before the rest yanked free and scrambled backward out of the trap. By the time they regrouped, he was gone again, swallowed by jungle and darkness and rain. Valkle arrived at the marsh minutes later, silent as ever, visor scanning the bodies half submerged in the muck. He said nothing, but his soldiers shifted nervously under that cold gaze. Whatever patience the commander had brought with him was running out. The hunt was becoming personal now. Valkle shifted tactics after the marsh incident. Instead of chasing Caleb blindly through the jungle, he ordered his troops into tighter squads, each one carrying decoy emitters that projected moving heat signatures in random directions. Through his scope, Caleb watched holographic figures sprinting through the trees, perfect imitations of human soldiers complete with weapon flashes and fake radio chatter. It was clever. Any sniper relying on heat alone might waste precious ammunition on ghosts while the real soldiers closed in from the flanks. But Caleb had been in this game too long to fall for it. The fakes moved too smoothly, too rhythmically, like actors reading lines instead of men running for their lives. Real soldiers stumbled, cursed, hesitated when branches slapped their faces or mud swallowed their boots. These projections glided like dancers. Caleb ignored them and kept his scope on the troops carrying the projectors instead. He hit the first one through the shoulder mount, shattering the device and sending the squad scattering into cover. The holograms winked out instantly. Valkle responded by ordering 3 squads forward at once, overlapping fields of fire, while others flanked wide on both sides. Caleb retreated deeper into the hills, staying low under the roots of fallen trees, weaving between boulders slick with moss. Every movement now felt heavier, slower. His muscles ached from hours of crawling, his uniform soaked and clinging like ice to his skin. He reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley and set up quickly, sighting down the slope where the aliens were advancing in disciplined lines. The sniper duel began when one of the aliens finally spotted his muzzle flash. A single bolt of plasma seared past his position, close enough that the heat stung his cheek. Caleb shifted left immediately, rolling through ferns while return fire chewed the ground he had just left. The alien sniper was good, firing in controlled bursts, never staying in one place long enough for Caleb to get a bead on him. For several tense minutes they traded shots across the valley, neither hitting anything but trees and mud, until Caleb spotted the briefest flicker of movement where the enemy had fired last. He exhaled slowly, waited for the next flash, and put a round through it before the alien could shift positions again. Silence followed for a few seconds before angry shouting confirmed the hit. The enemy sniper was down. Caleb used the pause to relocate yet again, crawling along the ridge until he found another angle overlooking the valley floor. The remaining squads were advancing slower now, rifles sweeping in tight arcs, formation tighter than ever. Valkle himself moved among them like a shadow, his black armor nearly invisible between flashes of lightning. Caleb watched him through the scope, waiting for the perfect shot, but the commander never exposed himself for more than a second at a time. Always moving. Always covered. Rain hammered the valley harder, turning the slope into a slick mess of clay and water. Caleb used it to his advantage, sliding silently downslope until he was level with the advancing troops. He planted 2 mines in the mud before circling wide again toward higher ground. Minutes later a squad stumbled straight into the trap. The blasts tore through trees and bodies alike, deafening even through the storm. Caleb picked off 2 more soldiers in the confusion before fading back into the jungle. For the first time the aliens stopped advancing. Their voices over the comms were sharper now, tinged with the kind of tension soldiers got when they realized the mission briefing had lied to them. The human wasn't trapped out here with them. They were trapped out here with him. Caleb heard Valkle ordering artillery drones from the landing zone. Heavy stuff. Enough to flatten half the valley if needed. He knew he had to keep moving before they boxed him in completely. As he crawled along another ridge, pain flared suddenly through his left leg. He looked down to see a burn scoring across his thigh armor, smoke hissing where the shot had grazed him. Another alien sniper. He rolled behind a tree trunk as a second bolt sizzled into the mud where he had been a heartbeat earlier. The shot had been close. Too close. Blood trickled warm under the armor plate, though the burn had sealed most of it. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the sting, and scanned the opposite ridge through his scope. There. A faint glimmer between 2 branches. He waited until the next flash lit the trees, then fired once, twice, 3 times. The glimmer vanished after the second shot, and no more bolts came from that ridge. His leg throbbed as he crawled again, slower now, dragging himself through vines and roots until he reached a shallow cave carved into the hillside. He pressed a bandage over the burn, teeth clenched against the pain, while listening to enemy chatter echoing through the storm. They were frustrated, angry, tired. He could hear it in the clipped tones, the way orders were repeated twice now, as if soldiers weren't responding fast enough the first time. Fatigue was setting in. Fear came next. Then something unexpected crackled through the comm-net. A different voice this time. Quieter. Hesitant. Not Valkle's cold bark or the usual squad chatter. It spoke in the alien's own language at first, then switched to broken English. It said it could help him. Caleb froze, listening carefully as the voice gave directions to a supply cache abandoned during the first wave. Medical kits. Ammunition. Safe paths through the ridges where sensors were weak. Caleb waited for the trick, for the coordinates to lead straight into an ambush, but the voice sounded young, nervous, desperate even. It claimed Valkle was getting soldiers killed for pride, that he didn't care how many died as long as the human went down. Caleb stayed silent, considering. Maybe it was a ploy. Maybe not. But the voice led him toward the cache, guiding him around a squad patrol so precisely he started to believe it was real. He reached the supply crates buried under camouflage netting and found everything exactly as promised. Ammo packs. Ration tubes. Even water purifiers. He patched his leg properly this time, all while listening to the mysterious voice feed him more troop movements, more blind spots in the sensor grid. Through his scope he saw one alien lingering near the rear of a squad, helmet turning nervously as if expecting someone to notice he wasn't fully focused on the search. The voice in the comm grew louder when Caleb centered the scope on him. The traitor never looked Caleb's way but kept whispering instructions through the net, marking patrol paths with subtle laser pings the others didn't notice. For the first time since the hunt began, Caleb felt the odds shift slightly in his favor. One alien among them wanted Valkle to lose. Maybe even wanted him dead. Whatever the reason, the commander's own soldier had just become Caleb's unexpected ally in the mud and rain. The rain had not stopped for more than a minute since the first scouts fell, and now it hammered the valley like the planet itself wanted to wash the war away. Caleb crouched under a dripping ledge, rifle balanced across his knees, listening to the comm net crackle with tension. The voice of his unexpected ally spoke again, quieter this time, warning him that Valkle was setting a trap near the old comm tower ruins 2 clicks east. They were pulling soldiers from every squad, massing them in the ruins with floodlights and drones covering every angle. The commander was done playing games. He wanted the human dead before nightfall. Caleb studied his map display on the rifle stock and saw what Valkle was trying to do. The tower ruins sat at the junction of 3 valleys. Any approach funneled straight into overlapping fields of fire. Once Caleb walked in there, he would be cut down before he took 10 steps. It was a killing ground disguised as bait. He listened carefully as the ally whispered coordinates for patrol gaps on the north ridge instead. If Caleb hit the supply convoy parked there, he could cut off Valkle's ammo chain and force him into retreat. That made sense. Starve the beast before killing it. But it was risky. The north ridge was exposed, and Valkle's lieutenants would be waiting for any move outside the valley. Caleb asked himself why the alien was helping at all. Pride? Revenge? Maybe he hated Valkle enough to switch sides for one night. Whatever the reason, Caleb accepted the information without trust but with interest. War made strange friends sometimes. He moved out just after dusk when the rain turned the air into black curtains. The north ridge loomed like broken teeth above the valley floor, floodlights sweeping lazily across the slopes. Caleb crawled on his belly through the sucking mud, moving an inch at a time whenever the lights shifted away. He passed within 20 meters of a guard post where two aliens smoked ration sticks under a torp, helmets off, rifles leaning against the rocks. Their voices carried over the rain, mocking the dead scouts from earlier waves, calling the human lucky rather than skilled. Caleb almost smiled in the dark. Luck had nothing to do with it. He reached the convoy parked under camo nets near the ridge crest. 6 cargo haulers loaded with ammunition crates and fuel cells waited for orders to move forward. 2 guards circled the perimeter while a third dozed inside the lead vehicle. Caleb planted charges under the rear axles, sliding like a shadow through puddles while the rain covered every sound. When the last charge was set, he crawled back downslope and detonated them remotely. The blasts rolled through the hills like thunder, flipping haulers into the air, scattering fire and debris across the ridge. Ammo cooked off in secondary explosions, fireballs lighting the rain in violent flashes. Alien comms erupted in chaos instantly. Squads shouted over one another, demanding reports, cursing about ambushes. Valkle's voice cut through the noise like a blade, cold and furious, ordering units to seal the valleys and hunt the human down now before he slipped away again. Caleb was already moving, circling wide through a stream bed choked with mist. He knew what came next. Desperation made commanders reckless, and reckless men exposed themselves sooner or later. The mysterious ally spoke again, voice shaking now as if expecting discovery any moment. He said Valkle was pulling every squad back toward the tower ruins for one final push. Even artillery drones were redeploying there. Caleb realized what the ally was giving him. A chance. If the entire enemy force collapsed inward toward those ruins, their perimeter would thin out everywhere else. Caleb could strike the command post itself, maybe even take Valkle down before the final sweep began. It was insane. It was also the only way to end this before sheer numbers buried him. He crossed 2 ridges under cover of the storm, slipping past squads rushing toward the ruins. Voices barked orders in the alien tongue, soldiers stumbling through mud carrying extra ammo packs after the convoy destruction. No one expected the human to be moving toward the center while they collapsed inward from every direction. Caleb reached a bluff overlooking the tower ruins just as the floodlights snapped on below. The place glowed like a stadium in the rain. Walls half collapsed around the old comm dish while squads took positions behind barricades and drones circled overhead. Caleb spotted Valkle near the center, black armor gleaming under the lights as he directed soldiers into tighter ranks. The commander looked calm despite the chaos, visor turning methodically as if victory were inevitable now. Caleb set up on the bluff, scope resting against a jagged rock, crosshairs steady on that black helmet. One pull and this whole mess could end. But before he fired, the ally's voice shouted a warning in panic. It was a trap inside the trap. Valkle had left his own soldiers in the dark about part of the plan. The moment Caleb fired, hidden artillery drones buried in the slopes around the bluff would triangulate his shot and blast the entire hillside to ash. Caleb shifted instantly, scanning the slopes above him, and saw the faint glimmer of drone optics among the rocks. Silent. Waiting. He almost laughed despite himself. Valkle had been willing to use himself as bait just to draw the shot. The commander never intended to fight fair. Instead of firing, Caleb planted the last of his charges along the bluff edge, then slipped downslope toward the ruins from the opposite side while the drones waited uselessly for a shot that never came. He crept through drainage ditches filled with black water until he was inside the outer ring of fortifications. Soldiers above him scanned outward, never imagining the human might already be among them. Caleb set his detonator as he crawled beneath the central fuel dump stacked against the old tower wall. The ally spoke one last time, voice tight with fear. He said Valkle suspected a traitor now, that squads were checking comm signatures for unauthorized transmissions. The ally told Caleb to trigger the charges the moment Valkle called the final advance, when every squad would be inside the ruins ready to sweep outward. Caleb waited, lying in the mud under the fuel tanks while rain drummed against the metal above. Minutes later Valkle gave the order, his voice cutting across every channel. All squads surged toward the outer trenches for the final sweep. The ruins crawled with soldiers shoulder to shoulder, drones hovering low over the mud. Caleb pressed the trigger. The bluff behind them erupted first, the drones on it vanishing in a chain of fireballs as the charges cooked off their own munitions. A heartbeat later the fuel dump ignited, turning the center of the ruins into a roaring tower of flame. Soldiers scattered in every direction as ammo crates detonated like thunder trapped inside the walls. Drones spun out of the sky trailing smoke. Chaos ripped through the ranks before they even understood what had happened. Through it all Caleb moved like a shadow toward the command platform where Valkle stood frozen, visor reflecting the inferno rising around him. The commander turned at the last second as Caleb stepped out of the smoke, rifle leveled, mud dripping from his armor. Rain hissed against the flames while the two men faced each other in the wreckage, one human and one alien, the hunt boiling down to this final moment in the mud and fire. The rain poured harder as if the sky itself wanted to drown the flames consuming the tower ruins. Firelight danced across the shattered walls while drones crashed from the sky like burning meteors. Valkle stood perfectly still on the command platform, visor glowing faintly through smoke and rain as Caleb approached with his rifle raised. Around them soldiers screamed orders, dragged the wounded through mud, tried to regroup while secondary explosions ripped through ammo crates. But here on this patch of broken stone everything narrowed to two figures watching each other through drifting ash and steam. Caleb kept his weapon steady, breath slow despite the ache in his leg and the exhaustion dragging at his muscles. Valkle finally moved, not to raise a weapon but to toss his rifle aside into the mud. The gesture was clear. He wanted it ended face to face, no tricks, no distant shots through scopes and rain. Caleb lowered his rifle but didn't drop it. He knew better than to trust anything about this night. Valkle stepped down from the platform slowly, mud splashing under his boots, hands empty but posture coiled like a predator. Caleb circled slightly to keep distance, watching for the faintest twitch that might mean a hidden blade or pistol. But Valkle came on with nothing but fists and fury in his stride. Caleb slung his rifle finally and met him halfway across the shattered courtyard. The first blow came fast, a gauntleted fist swinging for Caleb's head. He ducked under it and drove his shoulder into Valkle's midsection, feeling like he had slammed into a steel wall. The alien barely staggered before catching Caleb with a backhand that sent him sprawling through the mud. Stars burst behind his eyes as he rolled aside just before a boot slammed down where his ribs had been. He came up swinging a broken piece of rebar torn from the ruins, jabbing it toward the gaps in Valkle's armor. The commander caught it in one hand and snapped it in half like a twig before driving his elbow into Caleb's chest. Pain exploded through him but training kept his body moving even as lungs screamed for air. He slipped behind Valkle as the alien charged, slamming a boot into the back of one knee. Armor or not, joints were always vulnerable. Valkle dropped to one leg with a roar before spinning and hurling Caleb backward into a collapsed wall. Stones crashed around him as he rolled away from a follow-up strike that cracked the masonry where his head had been. Caleb snatched a jagged brick and hurled it into Valkle's visor, shattering the outer lens and staggering the commander for the first time. They crashed together again among the flames and smoke, fists and boots and broken weapons striking sparks off armor and stone. Caleb fought with the vicious efficiency of a man who had spent his life in battlefields while Valkle moved with the precision of a commander who had survived a dozen campaigns. Every blow felt like it might be the one that ended it. Around them soldiers tried to push through the chaos, but spreading fires and collapsing walls kept everyone back. The duel had become its own storm inside the larger battle, untouchable and unstoppable until one of them fell. Caleb ducked another swing, drove his knee into Valkle's stomach plate, then locked an arm around the alien's throat from behind. Valkle slammed him backward into a wall again and again until Caleb's grip slipped and they both crashed into the mud. They rolled across the courtyard, grappling for control, until Caleb's hand closed around the jagged stump of metal left from the broken rebar. He drove it upward into the cracked visor just as Valkle slammed a fist into his ribs again. The alien froze, the metal punching through armor and flesh beneath. Caleb twisted hard and shoved him off, both of them collapsing in the mud as the commander staggered to his knees, clutching the piece of metal jutting from his helmet. For a moment nothing moved except the rain hammering flames into smoke around them. Then Valkle toppled slowly forward into the mud and didn't rise again. The surviving soldiers hesitated on the edges of the ruins, weapons half raised as Caleb stood swaying over their fallen commander. Some shouted orders, others demanded permission to fire, but confusion rippled through the ranks like a breaking dam. Their commander was dead, their drones smashed, their ammo dumps blazing to ash in the storm. Caleb raised his rifle again finally, not at them but at the sky where Earth gunships roared in low through the clouds. Blue streaks of friendly fire slashed into the remaining alien positions as Earth troops rappelled from hovering transports into the ruins. The surviving scouts broke and ran, some dragging wounded comrades while others vanished into the jungle without orders now that command structure had shattered. Caleb sank to one knee beside the fallen Valkle as rain washed mud from his armor. The alien's visor flickered once before going dark for good. Medics reached Caleb minutes later, voices shouting over the chaos as they checked the burn on his leg and the bruises blooming across his ribs. He waved them off until they confirmed the area secure. Earth banners rose over the shattered tower while gunships circled wider and wider, driving back the last pockets of alien resistance from the valleys. By dawn the outpost belonged to Earth completely. Fires smoldered among the ruins while engineers set up comm relays and landing pads where alien banners had flown hours before. Soldiers moved through wreckage recovering supplies and counting bodies while Caleb sat on a crate near the old command platform, drinking water that tasted like metal and smoke. Word spread quickly through the ranks about the duel in the rain, about the lone sniper who had bled the enemy dry before killing their commander with his own hands. Some soldiers passed by just to glance at him like he was already becoming part of the story they would tell later. Captured aliens huddled under guard near the landing zone, their armor blackened, visors cracked, weapons stripped away. One of them muttered something in his own language about thermal vision and ghosts in the mud. Another spat in the dirt and refused to look at Caleb at all. They had boasted once about their perfect technology, about hunting humans like animals. Now they whispered about the man who had turned their senses and pride into nothing but wreckage under the rain. When the medics finally insisted on hauling Caleb to the field hospital set up near the landing zone, he let them, exhaustion hitting harder now that the fight was done. As they carried him past the smoking ruins, he looked back once at the shattered tower where it had all ended. Rain still fell in steady sheets across the jungle, washing blood and ash alike into the rivers below.